So folks, you can't be around Bernard too long without catching some of his infectious honesty. So this talk is going to get very weird very quickly. So raise your hands, please, if you went to the toilet this morning. I'm not going to ask you what you did there. Okay. And the guys that didn't, you're either shy or disgusting. Okay? Now, be honest with me. This time, please, properly be honest. How many of you thought about where the toilet paper came from that you used? Bernard, even Rishi Sunak's going to get more votes than that, eh?
That would be weird if you think about it, I'm saying. Yeah?
I know. Okay, so indulge me a bit longer. Just raise your hand one more time if you ate something this morning. A croissant or something. Okay, good. Thank you. And now please again raise your hand if you thought about the farmer who made the croissant and the fertilizer company that supplied the croissant. No. Adam, excellent. I wonder what you spend your mornings doing. Okay, so listen, besides knowing that this group has a solid appetite and some regular toilet habits, the point of this exercise was as follows. Next time we feel the urge to complain that people don't understand the importance of mining by saying, where do you think your cell phone comes from? Remember that most of us are too busy living our lives to think about where stuff comes from. And actually not thinking about where things come from is part of the human existence, so you can spend your brain power doing other things. And this, I think, might explain why the understanding and perception of mining hasn't changed in decades. Because you see, we've been telling people to think about where their stuff comes from, when honestly, nobody really cares about that. Worse, at times, I would say we've been a bit smug about it, saying that we need to educate people about mining, assuming that they're ignorant. When in reality, like all of us, they're just disinterested. The oil industry has its own version of this when they say, and did those protesters come here on their magic carpet? You've heard this. So look, there is a time and a place to help particular groups understand the importance of minerals in daily life and to the energy transition. And policymakers are one of those groups that we should help understand that fact. But first, a few observations about where we are with perceptions in mining and how I think we got here. Look, side note, the reason I started by talking about food and toilet paper, you should never say those two words in the same sentence, by the way, was because I spent time with both those sectors to understand how they think about understanding and perception in them. And I'll tell you, the situation in either the fertilizer industry or, for that matter, the forestry industry, which is how we get toilet paper, is not much better than mining. So back to the point. Our conventional approach to changing hearts and minds about mining has been to emphasize the need for mined products. And the argument I want to put to you today is that that is at best incomplete, and at worst, it's counterproductive. And here are some reasons why. Firstly, it's a logical answer to an emotional question. People's feelings about mining, particularly if they're negative, are formed in their gut, and possibly as a result of personal experience. And what we've been trying to do is to appeal to their heads. Now, gut always wins. And for every piece of educational content you can provide somebody, they can find 1,000 pieces that reinforce the feeling in the gut. Second, it is true, but irrelevant, that mining is essential. Every product fulfills a need, otherwise it wouldn't exist. That's the nature of a capitalist economy. Demand and supply solve the problem of what is essential and what is not. Third, this approach of emphasizing the need for mined products actually can increase negative feelings. So if I'm negatively predisposed to something, and you come and tell me that I can't live without it, I'll feel worse about it, not better, because I'm now complicit in the harm that I think you're causing. If you don't believe me, just ask the plastics industry. And so what is then the perception of mining? It's hard to say, but here are a few data points. So GlobeScan, an independent public analysis firm, has been asking people annually for 20 years, around the world, over 30 countries, on the extent to which they think that different sectors are meeting their responsibilities to society. Now, in 2023, mining ranked last on that question. To what extent do you think sectors are fulfilling their responsibility to society? Mining was last, below oil and gas. It's pretty much always been at the bottom ever since this data was first collected over 20 years ago. Now look, this is the only global data set we currently have to understand perceptions in mining, and it's a very specific question about fulfilling responsibilities to society. However, some country-level polling suggests a slightly different picture, that actually mining is regarded as good and even better than some other sectors. Now, this is the case in places like Chile and in Canada, and you have some anecdotal evidence that backs this up. So, for example, the company that's most coveted by graduates in Chile is Codelco, the state-owned mining company. However, graduates seem to be voting with their feet in other parts of the world. Now, graduate enrollments in mining degrees have been on the downward in Australia, Canada, the US, and here in the UK, where now we have no undergraduate courses in mining here in the UK, even though this was once a global leader in mining education. Now, the next panel with superstars will tell you a lot more about this point, but the market cap of the 2,000 or so listed mining companies is probably less than Apple, give or take. Many, many reasons for this. The next panel will tell you why, but at least one reason, and I'm sure Adam will touch on this, is the poor perception of the industry and the poor understanding of the industry amongst generalist investors in particular. And finally, popular culture is often a good barometer of the general sentiment, and that, by that measure, brand mining is not good. From Avatar to an upcoming movie starring Cillian Murphy, you know, the guy from Oppenheimer. An irresponsible miner is a very popular choice for villain in Hollywood movies, and that tells you something about what people tend to think about the industry. Meanwhile, students in France grow up reading a book by an author called Zola, which I think is set in the 19th century, and has to do with the horrible conditions of mining that were indeed the case then, but imagine that French students grow up with that as their point of reference for mining. Okay, so on that basis, clearly you're this audience has great wisdom of the crowd, because I think I agree with your conclusion that London, we do have a problem when it comes to the perception of mining. And it's a problem not just for us as an industry, it's a problem for the world at large, because I'm not sure how you grow an industry 2x, 3x, 5x, 10x without fundamentally changing this state of affairs. So, if I have convinced you that perhaps we need to rethink our conventional approach to changing hearts and minds, what might we do about it? Well, here are some ideas. Here are some 4 specific ideas, and then we'll get into some Q&A. The first of those is I think we must consolidate standards and drive their uptake. You see, standards matter a lot to perception because they give people confidence that companies will follow responsible practices. Right now, we have too many standards for responsible mining, including some that claim to be the best, but which a tiny proportion of the industry has adopted. Now, I don't think we need a single standard, but we do need a smaller number. And on this, we are making significant progress, because ICMM is consolidating our standard, which is the mining principles, with 3 other standards. The World Gold Council, who are here, their responsible gold mining principles, Copper Mark, and Towards Sustainable Mining. Between us, we cover over 1/3 of the industry, and once this is done, the standard will be available to any company producing any commodity anywhere in the world. And it'll also be a blueprint for junior and mid-sized miners to be able to embrace responsible mining practices. So that's the first. Let's consolidate standards, and let's drive their implementation to change perception. Secondly, I think we have to create I didn't expect that from mining moments. I didn't expect that from mining moments. These are opportunities to use the negative perception of mining that some may have to show how wrong that perception actually is, if we demonstrate true leadership on the issues that really matter to people. Now, we've got good examples of this already, and at the risk of talking up our own book, the ICMM members have committed to being the first group of companies of their size in any sector, not just in mining, in any sector, to do the following. 1, to not mine or explore in World Heritage sites. Many other sectors have not made a commitment like this. 2, to support a nature-positive future by, amongst other things, ensuring at least no net loss of biodiversity at our sites by closure. First sector in the world to make a collective commitment of this type. Third, to disclose the tax that we pay on a country-by-country basis. Once again, the only sector to have made a commitment like this. Reporting our social and economic contributions consistently, including breaking that down by gender and ethnicity. Once again, not aware of any other sector that does this. And fifth, by committing to achieving net zero Scope 1 and 2 emissions and advocating for governments to put a price on carbon. That's a position we've had for the better part of 10 years now. These are examples of, I didn't expect that from mining moments that we're going to have to create more of in the future if we want to change perceptions. And my prime candidate for the topic that we could latch onto to do just that would be the issue of circularity. Because if we championed, as the mining industry, the conditions for a circular economy that reduces the need for primary production, society will look at us and say, you are acting in our collective interest. Now, look, we can do that with confidence that there will still be a need for primary mining, but what society is saying is, please mine, but not at all costs. Okay, so point number one, consolidate standards and drive their uptake. Point number two, create I didn't expect that from mining moments. The third idea is to spark curiosity in people in how the world works. Now, look, this is different from telling people the number of minerals in their toothpaste. That's shoving information down people's throat that they didn't ask for. Instead, let's work with artists, museums, and educational institutions to draw people into a conversation about how the world works, not just about mining, how does the world work, and emotionally move people to a space where they want to ask questions about where stuff comes from and to know more. Just give you one quick example. One of the world's best-known photographers is a Canadian called Edward Batinsky. He held an exhibition here in London called Extraction Abstraction, where he showed people images of mining, farming, and other industrial applications around the world. You cannot go to that exhibition and not be moved. Now, I don't know what you come out of it feeling. You either come out feeling hopeful or you come out feeling despondent, but you are moved emotionally. And we're talking to Ed about something we might do together that might actually showcase a better feeling of hope and show that actually done well and responsibly, mining can be very powerful. I think we've got to do more of that, to my earlier point, appeal to people's gut rather than just to their head. Finally, and this really might get me into trouble because it is the most difficult and controversial idea of them all, as a sector, we have to acknowledge our legacy and we have to work towards remedying past harm. Look, from acid mine drainage to unrehabilitated mines, to long-term health impacts from unsafe practices, as a sector, we have a lot to answer for. Now, I know some of you are going to disagree with this, on the basis that today's companies have too much to do to deal with our own stuff, instead of taking on the responsibility of others, and that it should be governments, really, who should do this, since they are partially responsible for allowing people in the past to get away with some of this stuff. Look, I understand those considerations. But trust is built precisely on doing the things you don't technically need to do. I don't need to tell the South Africans in this room about the importance of dealing with the past to jointly create a different future. And there are huge lessons to be learned from both the successes and the failures of the truth and reconciliation process post-apartheid. The simple fact is that asking people to trust in a better future while they still live with the impacts of the past seems to me to be both unfair and ineffective. And as humans, it is much easier to base our understanding on what's already happened than what could happen in the future. So people will lean into what's concrete for them. So, in conclusion, I appreciate some of this is provocative. And I'm not being provocative just for the sake of it. And I know that this challenges some of the conventional wisdom. But spending time with our stakeholders and with behavioral scientists has convinced me that we need a new approach if we really want to change hearts and minds. Look, I hope you'll agree with at least some of that, and you'll join us and embrace some of these principles around a different approach. But if not, at least the next time you see toilet paper, you'll think of me. Thank you.
Okay.
You won't even let me sit.
Why don't you come and sit? Sure. Yeah, I don't know. Sit down there. So, you and I recently probably a week ago, engaged on LinkedIn, and I said, dude, you are looking for trouble, because you were posting something like a high percentage of mineral development projects was stopped. And that's a good thing, or something to that. Just unpack that moment of madness. I mean, clearly you don't know who pays pays your salary. I mean, so there you went out saying, well, that's fantastic. Lots of projects got stopped in legal challenging processes. Just give us the context.
You're going to get me into trouble. That's
I
not
am.
exactly
That's my
what I
job
said.
here.
Okay, so what I said was that half the winners of the 2024 Goldman Environmental Prize were people that received the prize for successfully halting resource extraction
You
projects.
see, how mad is that? That's what he said. Huh?
No. The next statement was the mad part.
I know.
So the next statement I made was, as a proud representative of the mining industry, we as an industry should celebrate that fact, that half of the winners of the Goldman Environmental Prize won the prize for stopping projects from going ahead. So why did I say that? And I still believe it today, for two reasons. Number one, that if you believe in a responsible and healthy civic society, then creating the civic space for people to disagree with you is a very good thing, even if it means that sometimes you're on the losing side of it. So you've got to protect the space for people to have strong opinions that go against your interests. You can disagree entirely with their aims and the way they go about it, but you have to believe that civic space ultimately deserves to be protected. Now, one side note on that, before I tell you the second reason. Nobody who uses violence or illegal means to achieve their aims is covered by what I'm saying. That is a totally different story. But if you're using legitimate aims, then we should be celebrating the ability for people to say no, even when we're on the losing side. And the second reason was because the people that managed to stop these projects, and there were examples from Australia, from South Africa, and from somewhere in Latin America, I can't remember, they stopped this, or they achieved their goals using the legal system. So they appealed to the courts and to the national jurisdiction and said, you are allowing this project to go ahead, here are a set of reasons why it shouldn't. And ultimately, it was for the court to decide whether it rules in favor of the project or in favor of those opposing it. Now, Bernard, this is a principle that must remain sacrosanct, irrespective of which side we're on, because there are going to be cases when actually the court's going to rule in the project's favor. And if we have a track record of respecting the people who have won the argument, then we can expect those that lose the argument in future to respect the decision for us to go ahead. But if you have not stood for something when you're on the losing side, don't expect people to stand for you when you're on the winning side.
I agree, as I did online as well. But it does sound like controversial, and yet there's a healthy principle of due process, transparency, respect for outcomes of processes. It's exactly our platform here. He disagrees with me, and I allowed it. I'm getting to the questions from the audience. I just wanted to... Gray, you must know Gray, because he says, Ro, given the mining sector's history of bad practices, how can we effectively acknowledge this past while fostering curiosity and trust? So, I mean, you made the point that we have to acknowledge our past. I think the question is, how can we do this effectively?
So, look, one thing I just want to be very clear about. Yes, we have had bad practices, which is what the point I'm making and what the question is premised on. But the people that say it's all been bad are also wrong. So just to be clear, that's not the point I'm making. The point I'm making is there's been enough bad stuff in the past that we have to acknowledge it. And the question is, how do we do that most effectively and do it in a way that takes people with us? Okay, so let's use two examples. We now acknowledge the principle that seeking the free, prior, and informed consent of impacted communities, and particularly indigenous peoples, is the way that responsible mining is done. But that was not a principle that existed 30, 40 years ago when certain mines were developed. So when we are negotiating today with impacted communities on impacts that our projects will have on their land, can we, as part of that, at least acknowledge that when the project was first developed, maybe at that point, that community didn't feel there was sufficient engagement. They had no say at that point. And I've been to one such project recently in the north of Sweden, where the Sami people, the local indigenous community, said, in the 1960s or 70s, when this mine was put here, nobody asked us. So now, when you come to talk to us about a mine expansion, can you at least acknowledge that? And then let's have a conversation about how to come to an agreement. I think that's one way we could do it. And then, Bernard, another issue that I think we do need to wrap our arms around that we can do constructively is just to get some data on the impact that we have had on land through the last few decades of our operations. Those in the UK or those who read the FT may have picked up a couple of articles in the last month or so talking about the number of kilometers of floodplains that have been affected by metal contamination in this country. Now, that information is something that we can build on and improve because it's not a complete picture. And unless we have that information and we're willing to share it, to say, look, as a result of past practices, these are the square kilometers that are impacted by metal mining contamination, and then let's work towards, with governments, to set that right. Let's do something that rehabilitates part of it. We won't be able to get to all of it, but let's do something to rehabilitate part of it.
And that really is part answer to the next question from my favorite audience member, Mr. Anonymous. So what is the plan to address legacy sites? So you talk about the broader, like metal contamination of systems, but specific sites, big topic in South Africa, I'm sure in every mining country. Abandoned mines, legacy sites, now what? Who's responsible? How do we address it?
So you asked, what is the plan? Honestly, there is no plan.
And that is part of the problem, no?
Am I wrong? Somebody tell me there's a plan? I don't know of any plan. Individual companies are taking responsibility for their legacy sites. No question. That's happening. And many are making very responsible actions today to provision on their balance sheets for future rehabilitation. That is happening. Of course it's happening. But I'm yet to hear of a coordinated effort to go back and address the collective legacy that the industry faces. South Africa, you said, is a very good example. Australia has legacy. The UK has a huge amount of legacy of old mining, as does the US. But Bernard, honestly, I can't sit here and lie and say there's a plan and there's no plan.
You really have stirred up my sleepy audience, and geez, some of these questions. The
spicier, the better. Please.
Yeah. Do you think China and Saudi Arabia care about net zero, loss of biodiversity, etc.? So, I mean, this is specifically wanting to label certain players as bad players.
Let me tell you a story. So I was in a meeting with the chairman of one of the world's largest mining companies and the chairman of one of the world's largest Chinese mining companies. And the conversation was through an interpreter, and the chairman of the Western company said, well, and this was in discussions about something they were going to do jointly, if we're going to do this project together, Mr. Chairman of the Chinese company, it's very important to us that we follow high ESG standards, because that's typically what a Western person would say to a Chinese company. And at that point, the chairman of the Chinese company switched from Mandarin to English and said, Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, the consequences of me missing my ESG goals are a lot higher than the consequences of you missing yours. So don't worry, we are with you. And so, Bernard, I think we have to be very strict on measuring the performance on sustainability of individual operators and operations at a site level. But we must resist the temptation to claim certain things at a company, let alone a country level. There are great companies that have done some very bad things. I was in Brumadinho last week in Brazil. There is no other site you need to be at to remind you that very good and well-intentioned companies can do some very bad things. And then companies that you think are bad can have some very good practices. And so let's be strict on measuring people on practices, but I'm not that interested in considering entire countries or entire companies, for that matter, as good or bad. I don't think that's a useful
So those
frame.
last 80 pages of the annual reports, we can just stop reading, all the fluffy bullshit of how great we are. Okay, that's my comment, obviously not. So there are two specific comments, questions about the ICMM. You only represent 30-odd members. What is the plan to make it more representative, including Chinese, Southeast Asian, Indian players? But I want to add the other cynical comment, so that I only offend you once. ICMM is good at talking for a lot liberal-focused mining companies, not my words, all measured noted make it harder for junior end. So, I mean, is the ISM an exclusive club? Are you only representing the liberal mining companies? Are you excluding geographies and junior miners? I'm combining the whole ICMM sort of cynicism together in one question.
I really welcome that, please. I really, really welcome that honest question. So listen, some numbers and then a view on our approach. So ICMM, there are 24 companies that are members of ICMM right now. These are all the large Western listed industrialized mining companies. We have one Chinese mining company in the group, that's MMG. We have no Indian companies in the group. We have no Russian companies in the group. We have no Indonesian companies in the group. We had a Russian company, but we agreed that they would leave the group when Russia invaded Ukraine. So it is a self-evident truth that this is an Anglo-centric, large Western group of companies. However, that is not in any measure the intent with which ICMM was either established or currently operates, because everybody is welcome in the group if, big if companies are meeting the standards set out in the ICMM mining principles. There are 10 mining principles that break down into a series of performance-based expectations. Any company from any country who can demonstrate that they are meeting that requirement is welcome in the group. Now, I will tell you this, Bernard. For every 10 companies that applies to join ICMM, and we never make it public when a company has applied, so many do. For every 10 that seeks to apply or applies, maybe one makes it. And that's not because I'm sitting there with a judgment that this, no, Chinese company can't come in and this. No. I appoint an independent panel of experts to assess the extent to which this company is meeting the ICMM requirements, which are all based on responsible mining. If they are let in. You know, the CEOs cannot say, no, don't let this company in. And if they are not, if they're close, they're given an action plan. And if they're very far, we've said, look, come back when you're more ready. Now, Bernard, who here would argue that we should fix the problem of lack of representation from China, India, and other parts of the world in ICMM by lowering our standards so more people can come in? Nobody would argue that that's the way to do it. But at the same time, I am also very conscious that our direct level of influence is with largely the Western world currently. I hope that changes.
I've been biting my tongue when you say anybody can apply. I was going to say as long as you can afford the fees, but that's obviously just speaking on behalf of the junior. I want to take Amanda van Dijk's question to change the conversation in the remaining 2 minutes to positive. She says, what about the positive contribution of the mining industry to the economy, communities, quality of life? How critical is it to the energy transition? So positively, of course, as a spokesperson for responsible mining, restate it. Clearly, it is important and make a positive contribution.
100% it's important, Bernard. My gosh. And if for anybody that may have any doubts about my personal commitment to showcasing that, just look at anything I've read or said. It'll be so much about the amazing work that the industry does, the beautiful examples of lives that have been changed as a result of mining and of the responsible practices. But you know, if we only focus on that, and that's why I in this audience at least, we need to be honest with each other. That's why I talked about all the stuff in its totality, not just about the good stuff, because we have a tendency as an industry to only want to talk about the good stuff and not enough about the stuff we have to answer for. And let me just make it very personal here. Some of you know, I've shared this story with some of you before, but listen, I was born in India before I moved to South Africa, in a family that was very rich in love, but relatively modest in means. You know, we were never homeless, but we didn't know where the next meal was going to come from, let alone money for school fees and things like that. And then I think about all the other families that were in situations that, like mine, and much, much worse. We were even some of the luckier ones. And I think about which industry has the power to change lives at scale, especially in parts of the world where nobody else will go. And it's mining. Mining is the way that people who currently have very little can improve their lives at a scale that no other industry could possibly offer, in parts of the world that are often forgotten. So trust me, I am the biggest and most passionate advocate for the power of responsible mining to change lives for the better. But if we want other people to come on that journey with us, we've got to face up to some of the stuff that we like to ignore.
And we've run out of time, not too surprisingly. Rohitesh, as always, thank you very much, and thank you. We gave you a negatively slanted topic to come and address the issues. You did that well. You took the criticisms, the questions. So a very good first session for our day. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.